It is 4:15, and we have Dr. Taz Walker on the line from Creation Ministries International. Good afternoon, Dr. Taz.
Good afternoon, Mick. Good to hear you again. It's nice to be here after Christmas.
Yes, it's
and the New Year.
Great to have you online as well. And I've had a great time over Christmas. What about yourself?
Oh, I had a great time. Yeah, we caught up with family. We didn't go away, but we'll do that later in the year. Might go somewhere, but we saw our family, went to their homes, and it was really, really nice.
Yes, awesome. And Dr. Taz, of course, you're from Creation Ministries International. And the reason why we talk to you guys is because you guys understand creation. Most of the guys from Creation Ministries are super smart, just like Dr. Taz. He's a Bachelor of Earth Science, is that right?
That's right, Bachelor of Earth Science. I actually went back as a mature age student and studied geology, and that was a lot of fun. Previous to that, I'd studied as an engineer and worked as an engineer, putting in the various power stations and things which provide electricity for everybody. So that was fun. But I just had a passion to go back and learn about geology, because geology is the key to being able to understand how the Bible fits with the real world. So that's why I did that, and that was all good fun.
Wow. And of course, it was a Bachelor of Engineering with honours and a PhD in Mechanical Engineering. So
yeah, that's right.
That was well done. But right. Earth Science, does that mean geology?
That means geology, Earth Science. So Earth Science covers things dating. So there's things that are connected with studying the Earth that don't just involve study of rocks. So it involves lots of other stuff as well, involving the shape of the Earth. That's one of the things it involves, and that's really amazing, the way the shape of the Earth, once people understand it, once people have had it explained to them, they can see the effect of Noah's flood on the shape of the Earth, and it's just so obvious. And but when you're not told, you don't. So that's the way it goes.
Yeah. Now, I have a few friends that, they like to have a bit of fun at me. Yeah, they'll take it out on me in regards to the Earth being, just over 6,000 years old. They all have a bit of a giggle, and it's something that I've tried hard to sort of talk to them about. And I think, one of them in particular, he just has fun saying it, but he doesn't even know what he's talking about. But, of course, there's a lot of questions when it comes to the age of the Earth. And you being a geologist would understand the oceans. And,
yes.
I've read that, every year there's like 20 billion tons of sediment disappearing. Where does it all go?
Well, disappearing, it's coming off the continent. So, people would see sometimes maybe experience a farmer losing a lot of his topsoil, or a gully being eroded, or something like that in a storm, and it just gets washed down the river, and it gets deposited in the ocean. So that's where the sediment goes to. And it's quite amazing. Like some rivers, there's some rivers here where I live in Brisbane, and they are so brown, incredibly brown, because they're filled with sediment, and that's being washed down the river, down the Brisbane River into Moreton Bay, and then that sediment eventually, with the action of the water and that, it sort of gets carried out to sea, and it goes down the continental ridges, continental slopes, onto the floor of the ocean. So that's where it all goes, and it
only makes sense that if that's the case, Dr. Taz, there must be kilometres and kilometres and kilometres of sediment under the ocean.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? You'd think it would be the case, and that's the way mainstream geologists find lots of it. But like so many things that mainstream geologists encounter, they encounter things which are surprising. And the thing is, there's not much sediment on the ocean at all. The actual depth of the sediment on the ocean floor is less than 400 meters, and in many places even less than that. and because the ocean floors have been, according to the idea of evolution and millions of years, they've been moving, they move, and the ocean floor gets subducted. It gets pulled down into the inside of the Earth, into the mantle, and so any sediment that's on the ocean floor would get subducted down into the mantle. So it's not exposed for that long, like even within long age thinking, it's not very long. And so they would expect, they would still expect to find sediment that's sitting on the ocean floor. But the amazing thing is when they do the exploration, they don't find it at all.
Right. So when it comes to long ages, I guess that's one point for the creationists because
right.
it really doesn't fit their model very well, does it?
No, it doesn't. And that's the interesting thing about the age of something. You could say, well, based on, I wrote an article called "The Mud is Missing, so the World is Young," and that's available on the website creation.com, as you know. And basically, you lay the evidence out that's showing that the Earth is young. And but of course, I wasn't there. I wrote the article about what happened in the past, but I didn't see it happen. There were no scientists there measuring it at that time, and so it's based on assumptions of what we see happening now, and based on that, we conclude that there's much mud there. There should be a lot more, but there's not much. So that means the ocean's young. Now, a person who believes that the world is millions of years old knows that it's based on assumptions. They will say, yes, and they'll immediately think up, it just comes to their heads, and they think up some excuse about why it's not working in this way, and they come up with an explanation. And I always say that's the way it works when you're trying to work out a date for something making measurements in the present, and you were not there in the past, is that the two of you end up arguing about things in the past which neither of you saw. And so it comes back to your assumptions. But the thing is, the sediment on the ocean floor, if you just take it at face value, you measure what's there, and you base it on the measurements that we make today, there's nowhere near enough there, and so there's very strong evidence that actually supports the idea of a young Earth, and so that's I really think that's good. I like that sort of stuff.
And of course, if they say, the evolutionists say, okay, it's being sucked back into the center of the Earth, they're almost saying, hey, one of the other biblical truths could be right. If it's sucking in mud, it must be sucking in water. And of course, before the Great Flood, there was water coming up from the deep. And
that's right.
So basically, the Bible said there was water down there, and a lot of people have found that hard to understand. And now all of a sudden, they're saying, yeah, this stuff gets sucked down. It must go down with water. So there must be a lot of water in the great deeps as well.
That's right. And that's a very interesting, that's a very interesting thing that the geologists have become aware of as they explore the inside of the Earth. Now, they can't go down there and have a look. It's basically, they work it on the seismic waves from earthquakes. And so they have seismic recorders. They're all over the Earth now. And so from these recorders, they can work out which way the seismic waves went, and they can make some sort of assumption about what's down there. And they're reasonable. But they discover there's a certain layer where the properties of the Earth's crust, the Earth's mantle, change as you go down. And they identified a mineral called ringwoodite. And based on this mineral, it actually has water inside the mineral structure. And so they've done calculations, and they worked out that there's enough water in the ocean now, not in the ocean, in the mantle, hundreds of kilometers under the surface of the Earth, to fill the ocean something like a dozen times over. So there's still lots of water under the Earth. And so it could well be that some sort of change in the stability or the pressure that occurred during the flood caused a lot of water to suddenly erupt from the mantle. And that's what the Bible says. It talks about the fountains of the great deep broke open, and then it talks about the windows of heaven. Of course, there's not windows there, but it's like as if something opened up and the water came out from the heavens, and the waters just continued to come onto the earth. They lifted up the ark, and they continued to rise until every mountain under the entire heavens was covered. So it's quite a remarkable thing, a description that's there. And that is a case like we were not there, but the Bible tells us that Noah and his family were there. They were in the ark. And so we can assume that they were making observations of what they could, and they wrote it down, and that record's been passed on to us. And so we're not just making a stab in the dark. It's based on evidence, based on our assumption that this evidence was a real event. Yeah.
So this ringwoodite, is it something that was sort of did the creationists or the evolutionists come up with the ringwoodite? Because it sounds to me a lot like a porous sort of sponge. It's a rock, but it's somehow porous and has similar spacing to a sponge.
Yeah, well, it does sound like that. Well, some minerals are like that in that they can change. The mineral structure can change under certain pressure conditions, and it can absorb water or it can release water. So it's the same with silica, which is like quartz. If under certain conditions, chemical conditions, this quartz, which is a hard mineral, can absorb silica, and it changes into it's still silica, but it's an opal structure. So opal is a silica, a quartz, which has actually absorbed water and it's become hydrated, and it's got this beautiful opal structure. And so that's an example of how minerals can change under certain conditions, under certain chemical conditions, certain pressure and temperature conditions. They can change. And it's amazing the sort of possibilities and things that you learn from understanding the way these things change.
Wow. Look, we're going to go into a little break right now, and we'll come back to Dr. Taz Walker very shortly. Hey, if you have any questions for Dr. Taz, please send them through to us. SMS 0401 949 949. That's 0401 949 949. That was Shine Bright with Only You. You're on 94.9. It is 22 minutes to 5. And we have Dr. Taz Walker on the line from Creation Ministries International. They have their own website, creation.com. And today we've been talking, a lot about the mud. The mud that, isn't on the seafloor. Considering the amount of runoff and the amount of erosion that happens, there should be a lot more mud down there, and there's not. And we've also talked about, how that mud might somehow, or the theory is it runs into the middle of the earth somewhere, and it would run in with a whole lot of water. And also talking about how the Bible talked about, during the flood, all this water came from the great depths, and it's gone back to the great depths. So the Bible talked about it for a long time there before anybody knew that there was water down under the ground. In fact, most people believed there definitely wasn't. I assume, Dr. Taz, that was a fairly more recent sort of discovery, the water under the ground.
Oh, yes, it was. It comes about basically as a result of, as scientists have been trying to figure out what's inside the earth. Of course, we don't have access to it. You can't go down there. But using earthquake waves and being able to figure out where they go, sort of from one side, and how they're deflected and reflected and that sort of thing, that they're able to work out could be a structure of the earth inside. And so you've got to the earth, the continental crust, and that goes about 50 kilometers, and then under that you go down about 400 to 600 kilometers, and you've got the upper mantle, and then there's a transition zone, and then you've got the lower mantle, and you're not even to the middle of the earth yet, but in that mantle there's this transition zone where the mineral structure changes. There's a pressure. There's, coming from the surface right through down, the pressure's increasing, and so there's this transition zone, and they think it could be there that this particular minerals change from one form to another and release water. And it's called ringwoodite, and it's actually in the mineral structure. The guy who sort of has done work on this, he sort of says the water is sort of along the grains of the atomic grains that are inside this mineral. He's done experiments to change a fairly common mineral on the earth called olivine. It's a green or yellow mineral found in volcanic rocks, and it's like a gem, but it's not good enough for a gem. It deteriorates. But he's puts olivine with water under pressure, and it changes into ringwoodite, which is a blue. It's a blue mineral, and so he's come up, with, and I think people generally accept what he's done. He's demonstrated these things in the laboratory. And so he's come up with the idea that there's still lots of water down under the earth, enough to fill the oceans to some 12 times over, which is amazing. And so when you sort of think about it, it's not as if the Bible writers were making up the story about the flood. It's a record which is passed down. From our point of view, it's passed down by the people who were on the ark, which is Noah and his family and their 3 sons and their wives, and so it was passed down to their children and that were born after the flood, and it was written. So actually it's a very detailed description about what happened, and you can work out the timing of it, how long it took, and the water going up, and then how long it took to come down. It took longer to come down than it took to go up. It took something like 5 months for the water to rise on the earth until the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and then it took 7 months for the water to flow off the earth, to recede off the earth. And so that's very interesting.
It's probably being sopped up as well.
Yeah, that's right. And so those stories, of course, that's the key as far as the key. How would you say? The key assumption, the skeptical assumption, which was made, and it's been sort of accepted for a long time, is that Noah's flood never happened. And it's not been proved, it's just been assumed. And by Noah's flood never happening, that's where the ideas comes from. They just assume that the rocks changed very slowly, never a catastrophe. And so Noah's flood is the key, really, to tying the whole Bible together and starting with creation. But the flood is the key. You sort of can't understand creation until you look at the flood. And so that was a real eye opener for me when I was, in my 20s. I still couldn't figure it out at that age. And I got a book called The Genesis Flood by Whitcomb and Morris, and it was their book which launched the modern day creationist movement. Yeah. And which is interesting. Now, it's interesting. People used to, they could point to evidence. There's amazing evidence of design in the world, and you can see the evidence of God's design, His amazing knowledge and skills in the world about. But people dismiss that because they think the world is millions of years old, and so even with this amazing design, it wasn't until there was a return, the flood, that there was a big move on understanding creation. And the fact.
Yeah. Dr. Taz, I had a question come in on our text line. Could you explain what you think the mechanisms are of the springs of the great deep broken open?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of discussion among creation geologists about what the exact things are, their meaning for that. But it does give the impression, some people envisage that it means the Earth's crust broke open and there was water under the crust which came out like a geyser, which went, miles and miles into the atmosphere. And that's a popular theory, but not a lot of creation geologists buy into that. But it's just to do with the water coming from underneath. And we see in the rocks a lot of evidence for the early rocks being, containing coming from water or from solutions which contain minerals in it. And so we find banded iron formations in Western Australia where the minerals were iron-rich liquids, which they laid down these layers of iron and then layers of quartz and then a layer of iron and a layer of quartz. And these are being mined for iron ore, and they're being shipped across, I think, to Japan and other places where they turn them into steel. So these are early rocks, and so that could well be, involved with the fountains of the Great Deep, the water coming. But there must have been something that Noah could actually see as well, because he described them as the fountains of the Great Deep opening up.
Well, when you see the Noah movie, which I know isn't particularly biblical, that's the recent one, and of course you see water squirting up out of the ground. You can imagine that even if there was a lot of this ringwoodite under the earth, which is like a sort of a sponge holding all this water, and if it's somehow squeezing the water out, in a lot of places the water might not have been able to get through, in which case in some places you would have had it squirting up, and other places it would have just been rising. That's how I imagine it.
Yeah, I imagine it like that too. So there's water that comes out, but not only water, there's also it's a lot of water mixed with molten rock, which is called magma. And so the magma, there's lots of examples, on the earth where the magma, huge volumes of magma, tens of kilometers across, have come up in the Earth's crust, and they form these great big volcanic, it's not, they call it igneous intrusions that are there. Plus you also have huge volcanoes, like in India, there's called the Indian Traps, where they call it flood basalt, not after Noah's flood, but because the magma was so much of it, it was like a ginormous flood on the tip of the point of India. And also in North America, up in Washington State, there's a lot of flood basalts there, and other places. So Noah's flood was an enormous, ginormous catastrophe. And anybody that was not on the ark, sadly, perished, as well as animals, and lots of marine creatures, fish, and seashell, the jellyfish and things like that, they all perished as well. So it was ginormous, and that changes the whole way you read it. When you read it, it just gives you an idea for just how big it was. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Dr. Taz, we've come to the end of another week, and I thank you so much. It's absolutely awesome having you, able to speak to us about these things, and give us some sort of understanding of how the earth works, and so much when I speak to you, we can see that the Bible, things that were written in the Bible way before science could prove these mechanisms are at work, were at work. The Bible talks about it, but it was way before we could have known.
That's right. And I think it gives people, what we're talking about, you and I, it's what you might say, a different way of looking at the same evidence and the things that various geologists are publishing about. And we're saying, that fits with this or that fits with that. And the fact that you've got it on your program, I mean, people are becoming informed and becoming aware of what it is. I really think it's amazing. Like sometimes there might be a news report and it talks about something to do, and it looks like Noah's flood, and this news report says they really can't understand what happened, and there's usually some people underneath commenting, it sounds to me like Noah's flood, which is really good. And so that's because people are informed, because you put to discuss these things on your program.
Yeah, well, it just does make so much sense. Thank you, Dr. Taz. Another fantastic week, and we hope to talk with you again really soon.
Really soon. Well, God bless you, Mick. It's really good to catch up with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Taz. You are on 94.9.